Hi, so it's Nikki Dodd in mediation. When I talk about boundaries in a more physical sense, now I talk a lot about the boundaries and projections energetically, but when I woke up this morning I thought to myself, actually I want to discuss the fact that often we avoid conflict. We don't want to talk about, we don't want to address issues. Sometimes we find easier workarounds. And we convince ourselves because actually we know we haven't accepted what they've decided with this, but we know we're not. So we write it in our journal, or we maybe tell someone else later. But when we're in the moment, we never actually, even afterwards, we never actually push back on it on a physical level. And when I'm talking about physical, I'm not saying literally push back, because that's very rarely the case. I'm talking about saying no, that whilst you believe that is who I am or what I am not. Or actually no, this, I've said no. No is one of the most powerful words. Or I won't be doing that. So sometimes we just it's kind of that we don't want to get into it, so but we know in ourselves that we don't agree with it. Now that's not enough to kind of know, because somewhere along the line, somewhere in us, we are kind of accepting it, because we're not rejecting it. We're only rejecting it energetically. The person is still throwing it to us, but it means that somewhere we kind of perhaps don't fully believe that, and we kind of perhaps are also buying into that projection because they're throwing it at us and we haven't actually rejected it. So somewhere it's still within us, it's still being held by us. So think of it like if you have a plot of land, you have a house on a plot of land, and your neighbour accidentally, when they're doing some building work, accidentally kind of puts their fence a few inches over, or plants a bed of flowers a few inches over. Now if you don't say anything about it, after a while that land becomes theirs. They've done a land grab. Now that can be a few inches, but what if that carried on being a few inches, and after a while they've eroded away some of your land, they've taken it from you. Because that's what happens when we don't say, when you don't speak up, is that it's taken from us. And also we often try and make ourselves small because it's easier than having to deal with a conflict. So we use a lot of the time workarounds, and we convince ourselves that that's okay. We don't need to address the situation because we found a workaround and it works, and we are still enforcing our boundaries. We're still rejecting projections. It doesn't work like that. Remember, masculine, feminine. You need to believe it, but you also need to take action as well to really cement that in there, especially changing default behaviour. So a good example, a number of years ago, a very long time ago now, I was in a shared flat, and there's probably about 4 of us, I think, plus the landlady. Was there 3 or 4 of us? I can't remember. Anyway, she was a bit peculiar. So, like, anyone that cleans a bathroom and communal areas for 3 hours on a weekend when everybody else is trying to use their weekend to enjoy themselves was it. So there was a list of kind of rules that came round, and she'd often, if she was using the kitchen, she'd shut the door and want to use it exclusively. Now, any of you know, if you're in a communal flat, communal spaces can be used by everybody. That's kind of the whole premise of it. So all of us started, working our way around it in various ways. I went out to coffee shops a lot to study, so I was studying, so that was great. I went to coffee shops. I found I often didn't want to, I didn't know when I could come home, the kitchen would be free to eat, and when I'm hungry I'm not the nicest person. So actually I used to just go out to eat. I could afford it then, didn't actually bother me. And after a while I literally woke up metaphorically and literally and realised that I was shrinking myself back. And she also used to say these weird things to us, and I just really didn't want to get into conflict, so I just wouldn't say anything back. And she had these weird kind of ideas on issues of trust, so I didn't. And then when I had that kind of light bulb moment, I realised that actually I was allowing her to take my space by not shrinking back and not taking up. And I had to assert myself. I had to assert myself in the situation. So I'm quite an instant person, and I went out, got shopping. I thought, because I love to cook and eat. Well, I love to eat, but I love to cook, and cooking is very therapeutic, and also I like to eat healthily. So I went to the shops after work, grabbed some food, and then the kitchen door was closed, and I thought, oh, she's in there. No, I'm going to do it. I was a little bit anxious on the way home, because I don't always, and at that time I wasn't very good with conflict. I opened the door, filled the fridge, and started cooking, and her face was horrified. And I just said something along the effect of, this is a communal kitchen, I have every right to cook when I want to cook. There's enough space, so I will be cooking when I need to cook. And she was horrified and ran to her room crying, I think. And this started me thinking about it, and it was quite, it wasn't the most pleasant experience. And don't think that once you've done it once, that's going to be the end. What tends to happen is people will keep trying to, because they want you to go back. So the first few times you do it, the kickback will be quite hard, but keep going. So I had to keep going and using the kitchen and just going about that rather than using the workarounds. And every time she said something weird that she thought I'd said or done, I said, no, I didn't. And that reaction was quite strong. And that's her reaction, that's her experience, that's not mine. And I had to push that back to her. And later on, that's something that really stood me in good stead, because you actually have to stand up for yourself. And you have to turn around and say, no, that's your idea, but it's not mine, that's not who I am, because if not, you're accepting it to a certain level. So conflict sometimes is required, and it's not easy sometimes, but do not allow people to encroach, and you have to stand up for yourself. And this is a really strong point. You have to take up your space, you have to take your power back, because power is, again, about giving it away. I gave away my power in that situation. When I called it back, it was very interesting to see her reaction to it. Now that's her reaction, but actually I realised how much I had sacrificed to do these workarounds that I thought were okay. It wasn't. I needed it, and then I turned attention to the rest of my life, and now it's easier to spot it coming, and it's easier to start saying no. And it's quite funny, my day job is literally saying no all the time and dealing with conflict. So yeah, that's my message for today. Remember your masculine side. Remember to physically say no, whether it's in a letter, whether it's directly to the person, whether it's straight away or afterwards. It's really powerful. Take your power back. Take your, enforce your boundaries, and also take up your space.